Leonard Kaplan.
Welcome to What Do You Want to Do? My guest this week is no stranger to me. Dave Rattigan is a Globe writer and a stand-up comedian, and he runs a comedy business called Scamps.
Yep.
And we go back a long, long way. We began our careers at a cable station. I think I was an employee and you were an intern at the time.
I was a volunteer of something. I can't even remember what. It was so long ago, and my memory has failed. I got to correct you on one thing though. I left the Globe in 2017, so I haven't written for him for quite a while.
Hey, you still have bragging rights to that. You know, not everybody can write for the Globe.
Well, it was a good gig. It was a good gig while it lasted, and it was I wrote for the North section, so it was good. It was a good section. I was always proud to write for it. I was always happy to write for the Globe, and there was always plenty of work because the North section was really a strong section. So.
And why did they get rid of that?
They got rid of it because they had. I'm not privy to these things, but my understanding is that the other sections, the Globe South, the Globe, I don't know what the other one was. There was a Globe West. City, a Globe South, and a Globe West, and they combined them all into one. And there just wasn't enough work for all of us. So at that point, they said, you can submit, and I was, we had. Like everything in newspapers, it had been this big, and then it was this big, and then it was this big, and finally it was this big. And unfortunately, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, I was ready to leave, so I left.
That's a sign to me that they disbanded that because newspapers are slowly dying a very painful and slow death.
Well, it was interesting because the Globe North, as I said, was always. I think the Globe North was successful. I don't think the other sections were. So it was sort of a decision to, where do we cut and what do we, how do we, can you really have a paper which has a North section additionally and doesn't have a South or a West or a city? And I think they were, that's one of those management decisions. But yeah, you're right. I mean, newspapers don't mean what they used to. Which for those of us who grew up in newspapers, it's tough. It's a tough reality to accept, even though some of the best work that's done in journalism is still done by newspaper reporters writing for newspapers. People are reading it online. And
it's not the same.
It's not. It's a different reading experience, which is I liked when I could pick up the paper, sit down, read a story here. And then there's a story right here that catches my eye that I wouldn't normally read, but I'm on the page. And all it takes is for me to slide my eyes over, read the first couple of sentences, and then I decide if I want to stay. There's not a click, right. There's not that clicking process that you go to where, and I'm just an old man yelling that the world is changing.
I'm yelling right along with you, Dave, because I miss newspapers as well. I'll buy... Even though it's not worth the money, I'll buy the Globe on Saturday and I'll read it. And I just enjoy sitting at the kitchen table with it all spread out. And I do what you did, what you do, go from story to story. And if I don't want to read it, I move on. I mean, you can do that with clicking, I guess, online, but it's just not the same.
Not the
you
same.
Can feel it in your hand. I like to read a book in my hands too.
Yeah. And there were, bookstores. I like to hold the book. I don't know if I like the smell of books, but I like the smell of a bookstore.
Yeah, I get it.
And it's when I lived in New York City for the news. This goes back to newspapers. I lived in Soho, and I was going down there to see what would become of me. I was freelance writing. I had took a shot at the clubs down there. But one of the most enjoyable things about living in the city was I would go downstairs and I would sit at a cafe and I would have the paper and I would just read the paper as I drank a coffee. And it was very, it was a way to both relax and energize at the start of the day for me. And it's an experience that a lot of people, now the advantage is if you've got your phone and you read everything from your phone, the advantage is portability, but I don't know.
Phone's too cramped, way too cramped. People do so many things on their phone. I don't know how they do it all because it's so cramped. Even on a
Yeah.
big phone like mine, this is my phone because I can't see too well.
Okay.
It's enormous.
It is enormous. How do you, especially when you put it right in the front of the picture? When you
I
put it right
do
in the front of the picture, it's
I do
enormous.
audio recording with this.
You
And
take pictures. You don't have to take your camera.
right, right. There's advantages. It's you get addicted to it, just like the kids do. No matter what the age, it's an addictive thing. When I switched from my flip phone to my smartphone, I was kind of sorry I did it after about 3 weeks, but you can't go back
You
because you're
can't
gonna
go
miss so
back.
much.
It's
You
going to be
know.
the cause of civil war in our country as people are reading their phones and taking their news from well, not Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok now. But yeah, when we have our civil war, we can all point to our phones and say this was the reason.
Before we go into the main body of the interview, I want to ask you if when you were in New York, did you ever visit the Strand bookstore?
The Strand bookstore, I probably did. I did. I remember the Shakespeare bookstore.
It's
Where was
17
it?
miles of books.
Really? Okay, then I did. I didn't. That I
You
would
might
have
have missed
remembered.
it. I went into it by chance, and I was blown away. I spent like 3 or 4 hours in there just browsing. It was miles, literally miles and miles of books. I was in book heaven.
That's cool.
Anyway,
Can I give a plug to a bookstore since we're doing
of
this? And no,
course.
all right, Manchester by the Book. It's a little. It's in Manchester by the Sea. It's a used bookstore, so you're not going to find the new titles there. But it's a really cool bookstore. My daughter and I go there maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, and find all kinds of cool books. But it's one of those places which it's a browser's heaven. A
Uh,
browser, old time browser, not new time browser.
I get it. And there's a one bookstore that I can promote unremunerated. That's the Toadstool Bookstore in Milford, New Hampshire. That's a small bookstore, but it's very, very good, and
We'll
it
keep
has
it
the
in mind.
personal touch.
Next time I feel like driving to Milford, next time I've got
Yes.
4 hours to drive to Milford and back.
Aside from all that, Dave, you're
Okay.
doing what you love to do. You're doing what you want to do, which is the name of the show. What do you want to do?
Yes.
And unlike many others, most of us, you get to do it for a living. You've written for a living. You do stand-up comedy for a living.
Yeah.
You have your company for a living. You teach also. And
Yeah.
our careers parallel in that respect. Teaching gives you a lot of insight, I think, into the world, into other people. And that's great material for stand-up, I'm sure.
It's maybe indirectly. I'm always careful about what I take from the classroom and bring it. It
Oh,
usually
yeah.
works more the other way.
No names.
Right. Yeah. No names and no identifying characteristics,
Yeah.
and but for a long time, I always felt like when I was on stage, I was always a little bit nervous, and I would tell people, don't mention the globe, don't mention the globe, and nobody ever mentions the college stuff, which is
Hmm.
interesting. No other comedian. Maybe I just don't mention it anymore, but
Yeah.
but it's the thing where you're always afraid that you're going to say something on stage, and it'll somehow come back to bite you, either with
Yeah.
with college officials. And I've had the president of Northern Essex Community College come to see me, which is where I teach, one of the places. And it's not like anything I say is that bad or that controversial. But you're a comedian, you're on stage, you might say something for a laugh that you wouldn't say in normal conversation.
I mean, that's the risk that you take for humor. I mean, today's comedy climate is very, very politically correct, and it's more dangerous to be one now than it was in the 60s and 70s, I would say. Especially the 70s were the freest time, I would imagine.
I would think this. I was a fan back then. I wasn't a comedian, so I can't speak exactly to it. But guys like Pryor and Carlin in the late '60s and through the '70s, they really opened opened comedy up. Did people abuse it? I think to a certain extent. When there was a Boston comedy explosion, there'd probably be some comedians that were just vulgar for vulgar sake and
Yeah.
shocking for shocking sake. Um, so maybe you could say we created this problem for ourselves, or maybe we could just say that society has just come to a point where it gets really difficult to give them any point of view that clashes with their own, or Yeah, any point of view or any type of language in classes with their own sense of what's right.
The pendulum always swings back and forth, I think, with each
Histor-
generation reacting
historically,
to the last.
yeah, historically it has. Historically it has. So we'll see what happens with this latest swing of the pendulum.
Exactly. I hope we live to see it swing back the other way.
Yeah, it's not all bad. I mean, I see things happening in comedy now that I think are really positive. Um, I see a lot of comedians that are really like young comedians that are really good, and so it's not all bad what's going on. But do I see certain comedians who get Kevin Hart did a joke and really he just didn't want to explain the joke. He tweeted a joke. Do you remember this when Kevin Hart was going to do the I think the Emmys, and he had done a joke on Twitter like 7 years before. And if you listen to the joke and understand the joke, it's not that bad a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And they wound up taking him off the Emmys, which is
Oh, wow.
sad. It's sad. I mean, that's to my mind, that's an overreach. But on the other hand, there's probably been some things that have been said that are probably have made people's experience in a comedy club or in a comedy setting unpleasant, and you don't want that to happen.
Comedians are very rare, I think, in society. There's hardly anybody that you would know, like as an average person, who would become a comedian or especially a stand-up comedian. Because as I was saying to a friend of mine today, it's like being naked in front of the crowd because you're exposing what you think is funny. You're exposing your inner thoughts to people, and it's dangerous. Not only, I think, in who might hear it, but it's dangerous to yourself because you might reveal maybe something about yourself that you don't want people to know. How did
Yeah,
you get into comedy, and when did you make that observation, if you did?
I always wanted to be a comedian since I was a little kid, um, and I got divorced. And so when I got divorced, things were pretty bad, and it was I thought a constructive way to channel my energy. I was sort of like, well, things are really bad now. How much worse can they be? I was afraid of public speaking. I was okay in front of a camera, but I was petrified in front of a crowd. And so I
That's
thought, how
me.
bad? What's that?
That's me.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. I didn't know that was you, but that's. Um, and at the same time, somebody that I worked with, Beverly Yakovich, who I used to work with at North Shore Sunday, she was a salesperson, and she invited me to speak to the Danvers Lions Club. And I said, I'm really not very good at this. And I was writing a column, and the column was funny. And she said, "You're so funny, just be funny." So I went through my columns and I took out jokes from the columns. And I went in front of Lions clubs and I made the jokes and they laughed. And then I took the class and a monster was born.
That's great. That's great. Now, what year was that?
Oh, probably 96. I think it was 96, right around there.
Okay. I thought you did it a lot longer than that. Wow.
Yeah,
So you
I think,
waited a while. You were a writer before you were a
yeah,
comedian.
yeah, I was 36 years old. And um, I think that's right. I think my math works out. Math, not my strong suit, but
Me too.
yeah,
Another thing we
that's
have in common.
English heads. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, I was older and I had a lot of success. So I think a lot of people thought that I had a lot of success early. Then I had a ton of failure. But when I had the success early, I think a lot of people, because of my age and because of where I was, they just assumed the younger comics assumed that I'd been around a while.
Mm-hmm.
And but no, I hadn't been. And once my initial success, I passed, which is to pass is to get on at a club. And I passed on my 15th time on stage at the Comedy Connection, which was the best club in Boston at the time.
I remember.
And yeah, that was great. And but then it was all downhill from there for a while.
Wow. So now this is very interesting because I always say on this show that people discover, and I've observed as a high school teacher and a middle school teacher, some people really find what they love doing and are best at doing when they're very young, when they're still in school. So it sounds like you said you always wanted to be a comedian. What took you so long and what drove it I was going to say what drove it out of you. It didn't really drive it out of you. What caused you to submerge that desire between when you were a kid and when you were 36?
Sure. I was kind of directionless when I was in my, when I was 17 and up, I was kind of directionless, and I was pretty motivated. I mean, I was covering the Red Sox at age 17, which makes no sense now. It makes as little sense now as it did then, but I was, I was young. I was stupid. I didn't know. I started to write for the Beverly Times when I was a junior in high school. I got cut from the baseball team. Somebody told me you could get $5 a story. So I went to the editor of the Beverly Times, and he gave me the girls softball team. And so I started to write, and I continued to write. And I wound up just sticking in that profession for a long time, and eventually drifted from sports to news. Then when I graduated, I think I dropped out of North Shore Community College. Then I went to Northeast Broadcast School for a year, and I graduated, although I very nearly dropped out from not going. But at that time, and that's when I had my interest in television, but I had the accent, and I never worked hard enough to get rid of the accent. And I also decided I was a better writer than I was on air. So that was the direction. So the direction I stayed was writing, and I liked writing. I covered a Super Bowl when I was still in my 20s, the one where the Patriots got destroyed by the Chicago Bears. It was a great experience, and that whole year was a great experience, right up until maybe the second quarter of the game. But that was great. But I would go to banquets once in a great while, and I would have to speak. And I was just so afraid of public speaking. That's really why. That's one of the reasons I didn't do it. I mean, also, I couldn't do stand up. I mean, I would go to clubs on the weekend, but I was working a lot at night, so I didn't really have those nights off where I could really do that sort of thing. But I also was afraid of people, and like I said, when my marriage collapsed, and when I was in my 30s, it just was like, well, how bad can things be? The worst that's going to happen is they're not going to laugh, and which, by the way, is horrible. It's about when you're a comedian and you bomb, it's like one of the worst things you can go through that doesn't matter, if you know what I mean. It's like I had to remind myself, nobody died, nobody's going to jail. It's fine. They're all going to forget you, hopefully. And but I think when things were really, like I said, it was a combination of Beverly hooking me up with the Lions and telling me to just be funny, because now all of a sudden I had something I could just focus on. And so it was a combination of that, and it was a combination of just realizing that I had to face my fears at some point. And one way that's because I went into teaching. What I'm really good at is teaching public speaking, and the reason I think that I'm good at teaching public speaking is that I've had failures. I've had fear. I've had to face my fear. I remember the third time I was on stage at Daisy Buchanan's in Boston, and the show ran short. So my buddy Tommy Amato said, do you two want to go up? And it was myself and a guy named Ramu Amadi. We're going to do 5 minutes each. And Tommy gets on stage. He goes, you want to go a little longer? And the crowd says, yes. And he says, I got 2 comics left. He goes, I got a black guy and a white guy. Which one do you want? And they said the black guy. And he goes, okay, you'll get the black guy first. That was Ramu. And then you'll get the white guy. So I went into the back, and I was just petrified in the outside of the room, petrified, just sitting there doing relaxation exercises. And then I went out, and the set was okay. Set was okay. But the big thing was that I had faced my fears, and I had hung in there, and they weren't the greatest crowd in the world. But it was exhilarating for me, not because it was a great set, but because I had faced my fears and, succeeded versus a total failure.
You went through with it, and the world didn't end.
Well, that was not the time I bombed. that was, I did okay. All things, when you knew you have different levels of success. The first time I went on stage, I did really well. After that, it was kind of yay and nay. And that was one of the that was one of the yay sets, but it wasn't a great set, and certainly not what I would consider to be good now. But the big thing was that it was fear. It was conquering fear. And so having gone through the divorce and seeing how horrible that was, and then again, here's something I can't do because I'm holding myself back. I'm going to force myself to do it. And then I did it. So
Where do you think the fear came from in the first place?
I think it's, well, I think it's, I don't know.
Because I can tell you that this kind of an interview I couldn't have dreamed of doing years ago.
Okay.
And when I did Wrestling Talk, I had Paul Fay, the late great Paul Fay, with me.
Yeah.
And later on, I had Ed Whittier with me, and I always had a co-host. I had to learn to be myself all over again in front of the camera before I was comfortable.
That's
And
interesting.
now I like doing it by myself.
Really?
Yeah. So now what I think happened to me in junior high school, I was bullied to hell, and I had lost all confidence in what I could do. Before middle school or junior high, as they called it then, I I would do anything. Like I was not wild, but I didn't have any fear. And I think that's what put it into me. That bad experience. It took me that long to get over it. And at first I escaped through characters. The more different a character was for me, I would do skits like on video, nothing live, then I would be better. And then on Wrestling Talk, I learned how to be myself in front of the camera. And now, that was 31 years I did that. And now I can do it. So, I mean, maybe there's not a cause that you can remember that maybe we don't have that similarity.
Yeah, I can't remember anything specifically. I just was fearful. I did have probably a bad experience doing a speech where I just didn't do a good job, but I don't know. And again, to get up there and it's funny when I can't think of a time. I've had times. I mean, there were some situations I feel comfortable in and some I don't. When I was in college at WMWM at Salem State, I was a terrible DJ, but I would go to call a game and it felt natural to me. And part of the reason is because I was, I had a sports background. I was writing for sports already. Number two is you're always working with educators. So they're kind of showing you tips on how to do things, and that's good. But my very first time I did it, my color man, who was a buddy of mine, he was a little unprepared, I think, but he also was it was a technical thing. We couldn't hear ourselves, the feedback. We couldn't hear ourselves on the air, and we weren't sure if we were on the air. So we thought the line was set up. Back then it was a telephone line. So I was there at the rink, and we had no way to communicate with the studio. And my friend said, just start talking. So I started to talk, and then he left. He left to go check to see how things were at the studio. And he just left me for the whole game. And I just talked and talked and talked. And he showed up, I think, in the middle between the second and third periods. And he showed up and he said, yeah, he goes, they're just playing music between periods. You don't have to talk. And I'm like, well, thanks for coming between the first and second. But it was just being thrown in and forced to swim. But I always felt like if I had something in front of me, I could talk about it and I'd be prepared. I'd know everybody's names and I'd have my charts and all that.
Right.
Versus, music was not a super strong suit. I would play whatever the music director wanted me to play. And, but just having that microphone staring at you, and having to choose things, that was always hard for me. But having action in front of me was never a problem.
Right.
But I don't know if that's it. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it's the same thing. I just think everyone's a little bit different when you put a microphone or a camera in front of them. I mean, do you remember the first time you were in front of a camera?
Yes, I was a sophomore in high school, and I had a TV class, and it was great. I liked it because I was doing a character. See, I always had to be somebody else when I was doing it.
Yeah.
It's like me even today. I cannot dance, okay?
Yeah.
I only danced one time, and that was when I was in a Zorro costume with a mask. No one could see my face, and I could dance.
Yeah.
No, you don't get that opportunity too often.
I'll keep that in mind next time I'm invited to a wedding.
Let's talk about Scamps, your company,
Sure.
Scamps Comedy Productions,
Yep.
how you started it and what it is, and how you organize your shows and all that stuff, and what happened during COVID.
All right. Let's talk about the first one is why I started. Uh, my daughter had been born. I didn't want to go on the road. I wasn't making much money on the road, but I that was the path for me because I wasn't moving forward that much in Boston, and it was either find cruise ships and maybe Vegas or Atlantic City and maybe this and maybe that, and I was going to Pennsylvania at that point a lot, and I just thought, I don't want to do this. I want to be around as a father, and so I thought, maybe I'll just start my own company and I'll just do my own shows. And I had done a little bit of booking when I was in college at the Ladybug Lounge in Peabody. We booked bands, and so I just started booking shows in 2000. I'm not sure it was a 2000. She was born in 2005, so I must have started in June 2006 is when I got officially my DBA, and it was it was and it was good. I do a lot of fundraisers. I've never really been successful in finding a venue, that single venue
Mm-hmm.
where you can do shows every week.
Mm-hmm.
Not many people have, although a lot of people try. Um, and but I do a lot of fundraisers. I do a lot of theater shows. Every New Year's Eve, we've done a show at, or the last few, we've done a show at Marblehead Little Theater. We've done a show in Cinema Salem the last year that we had it. I've done shows in the past in the Cabot, although that kind of went away, and various theaters around. Basically, right now I'm focused on small theaters and fundraisers. Basically, not that I won't do a show anywhere. I've done shows in libraries. I've done shows on loading docks. I've done shows just about anywhere in a lumberyard. I've done shows on a fishing dock. But usually what we focus on is, like I said, theater shows and to a lesser, theater shows and fundraisers, more or less. Those are both, and everything else is kind of, if it comes along, we'll do it if the money's right. I do a lot of shows with older, cleaner comedians because so many people have been turned off by dirtier stuff, and dirtier stuff usually comes with newer, younger comics. Not always, but sometimes. So I do a lot. I probably raised, or let's put it this way, groups that I've been involved with have raised a lot of money, like millions, which is great. It's great to be a part of that. And I try to, when I've got a new group, I try to do whatever I can to guide them to the best possible outcome. Like don't sell raffle tickets for this much money. Do this to make a little money, do that to make a little money. This is how you sell tickets. You don't just put up a poster, things like that. So I try to help as much as I can because I want the show next year.
So I'm looking at scampscomedy.com, and you got a lot of heavy hitters on here. Lenny Clark, Steve Sweeney, Paul Gilligan,
Yep.
Paul D'Angelo, a lot of big names. How do you get these names? Is it because you worked with them all at one time?
Yeah. You work with when you're a comedian. It's a weird kind of a job because you can be on stage and all of a sudden Stephen Wright walks into the room, or Dane Cook, or Jonathan Katz, and all of a sudden they're going up, and if you're a new comedian, the story is always this: you've got a big chance to do your audition, and people are coming to see you, or you're doing an audition with the club, and that's when some huge comic comes in and they put them up just before you, and then you have to watch them for 20 minutes kill, and then you've got to go up with your brand new stuff. That's a really common. I've heard that about Rodney Dangerfield and the late great Rodney Dangerfield. But yeah, you work because guys need to work out. Justin McKinney, who does theaters in Maine and New Hampshire, and is a multiple comedy specials. He's a buddy of mine. He lives in New Hampshire, and he comes down to the Winner's Circle where we do a Tuesday night open mic uh, almost every Tuesday. Mike McDonald is a frequent flyer. He's another long-time New England comic, and I've worked with all these guys. Jimmy Dunn and I have done about 1 million shows together, and that's really how you meet guys, and that's pretty much how I book. You work with somebody, you find out if they're you find out funny, are they professional, and are they nice people to hang out with.
Right.
And those are the things that I basically go by when I book. And every so often somebody will want to reach out to somebody, and you have to say, and at that point I ask my friends, what's this person like? And it's, will they be okay for this group? Are they going to try to, are they going to be, like I said, are they going to be good for this group? Funny wise, and also are they going to hold the gig? Are they going to be professional? Are they going to be trouble? Are they going to be difficult to work with? Any of that? And for the most part, no, they're not. They're really, most guys are really easy to work with, most guys and women.
Have you ever done sketch comedy at all?
I have, poorly. I've done an improv. I was in an improv performance, and we were bad, but we were all comedians, so we were good at we were our stuff would fall apart, but we would find punchlines, so that was funny. Straight sketch I did a little bit of when I first started, and I like doing it. I really do. It's time consuming to get it right.
Right. Well, being a video guy, I did a comedy show in 1992 with my students, my after school club, which we call the cable club, and one adult that I taught in the town, because that was my job, to teach everybody, no matter what the age, how to do video. And that was the most fun thing I ever did in my life professionally, is doing the characters. And we would get the stories from the newspaper, and we would make skits out of each one. This is way before the Daily Show, And I look at those DVDs, and I say this about my wrestling show too, is I got to do what I wanted to do. I didn't get recognized by millions or even dozens maybe, but I got to do what I wanted to do. So
Well,
it's satisfying,
yeah, it's fun to, and that was, I mean, my discovery when I went to New York City. We went to New York City because because my second wife was had a job for an ad agency, McCann Erickson, which is the largest in the world. And so I went with her, and I just was finishing up at Emerson, and I actually held back a couple of months because I was an editor of three newspapers in the North Shore Weekly's chain. And I went to New York City, and I was writing for magazines, and I was trying to break into stand-up in New York, trying to break into a new market, and I got killed. It was just so bad for the ego, because you can't get on the good shows. There are 1 million people on the bad shows, and I had I been more patient, maybe I would have found something. Who knows? But I was old. I was 30 at that point. I was probably 40, and somebody said, we've already got our 40-year-olds. And
Ooh, that's harsh.
yeah, it's like, but I didn't force their hand. I wasn't so funny on stage that they said, oh, we've got to keep this guy. So well, one thing I discovered is I really liked doing shows, and I really liked it wasn't about success so much anymore as that I enjoyed doing it. And I would kind of follow it, and we'll see where it goes organically. And but that's the big thing is, do you like doing what you do? This is the great thing about cable television, is that if you live in the town and you're willing to pay your $25 to become a member, you can pretty much go in and you get help, and you can do whatever you want. I mean, it's I've done things at BevCam that I'm like, oh, I can really do this, and you'll help me. And it's great from a creative standpoint. It's a lot of fun, and everybody hopes that they're going to be the person who catches fire. And even if you're not, at least you've done it, and it's fun, and you can show people, and they can tell you it's great, even if they hate it. Can I tell you my advice?
Sure. I was going to ask that question. What is your advice to those who want to do that?
Actually, here's my advice to comedians. I give a lot of advice to comedians. I used to teach a comedy class, and I just had to give it up because of the variety of reasons. But I used to tell comedians a couple things, which is, all the stuff. Don't if they give you 5 minutes, don't do more than five. Do 4:30. If they laugh, it'll be about 5. If they don't laugh, it won't matter. Nobody's gonna, they'll be happy that you're getting off the stage. Um, and I give some basic advice, like, structure your sentence so that when you stop talking, you get to the laugh and you stop talking. Um, Make sure you have punchlines and not just funny setups, the things that you think are funny setups. They're comedy, but the big things are show up early, check in, and then sit in the back with the comics, and don't get in the booker's hair, and then thank the booker at the end. Don't go long. That's really basic stuff.
Right.
But here's the story I wanted to tell. Years ago, there was a mother of a high school student called me, local high school student, called me up and said, my son has some very funny YouTube videos, and his older sister's friends all think they're really funny. And I said, oh, that's great. And she wanted to know how he could become a comedian. And I said, oh, that's great. And I said, so what you want to do is you want to come to an open mic, and you have to bring 2 people, and I know he's in high school, so if you come with him, just understand that some of the language might be a little racy and blah blah blah. Anyway, the mother and the kid, they completely ignored my advice, and it was Bo Burnham. And Bo Burnham, next thing you know, he was headlining at the Comedy Connection, and he was taking his freshman year of college off to travel the country as a comedian. And now he's a fantastic talent who's writing, he's directing, he's starring in things, and he just signed on to be Larry Bird in an HBO feature that's coming out next year.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's a perfect story about how ignoring my advice was good for his career.
You never know about people, it just, and as a teacher, you'll know this. Sometimes you can't spot who's going to really soar at something.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can.
Right.
It's
I mean,
not
maybe if he had come to the open mic, I'll say this. Do you know who Ed Helms is?
No.
Ed Helms was in The Office, and he was in The Hangover, and I know he's been in other things, but he's had a great career. When I was in New York in 2000, he was in at some of the open mics I go to. He'd be in my group. He'd be in the open the group of comedians. He was going this way, and I was going this way, but you could tell he was good. He stood out. I remember the first time I saw him, I stopped at an open mic, and I thought, oh, this guy's pretty good. I didn't think the material was that great, but he was likable. There was just something about him.
Yeah.
It was likable. So I think sometimes and with Bo Burnham, I never met the kid. I just gave him this advice that it's a tried the norm.
Right.
And he just ignored it and just did his own thing. And but the number of people who come up and they say, well, I've done this stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
Who are actually good. That I don't know what the percentages are in that, but I don't think they're very high.
I wouldn't imagine they would be. No. Let's go back to the writing. And the writing has been a consistent through your career, from sports to the North section of the Globe and North Shore Sunday and all those papers. What's your favorite kind of writing? How did you know? Was there a moment in your youth when you said, I can be a writer, I can get money for this?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I don't know, though. I don't think there was any real moment. I'll tell you how I became really interested in the sports. Is I was a paper boy, and so probably I was a terrible paper boy, and I would read as I went, and so I'd be reading, and I remember reading about this guy. There was a big thing I'm not sure which paper it was, about this guy Cassius Clay, who wanted to change, or he's changing his name, and it was such a big deal. And I, of course, being however old I was, an early teenager, I thought, oh, this is interesting. Why are they so mad at this guy? Because he wants to change his name. And so that was the first that was the first memory that I have of reading of anything that I read that really struck home. But
Mm-hmm.
there was a writer, Lee Montville, who wrote for the Boston Globe. He was part of that great sports staff that the Globe had in those days. And I've actually I met Lee many times, and he actually he came on my podcast fairly recently, and he was the guy who got me interested. In fact, he was the guy who got me interested in sports. Through sports writing, I got more interested in sports, and because I got more interested in sports, I got interested in sports writing. And when I finally figured out I could make a living at it, probably I thought it from the time I was 12 years old.
It
I
happens that young and sometimes younger. That's true.
Yeah, and I always, I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't know what kind. It was only probably after, and to be honest, even when I was a sports writer, there were other things I wanted to do. There were other
Right.
types of writing I wanted to do. I would say, as a writer, the type of story that I like, and we come back to this all the time, and it's not the best way to structure your career. But if I had a story I liked, I was happy. If I had a story I didn't like, I wasn't that happy.
Right.
So if it was a column, if it was a news story, if it was something I had to really dig for, if it was something that kind of light and kind of fun,
Mm-hmm.
if I was interested in what I was doing at the time, that's where I wanted to be. And, more so than the events. The Super Bowl was great as an experience. I wish I had written better stories. Now, whether or not I might be being too hard on myself, but I
Most
thought my
people
stories,
are. Most people are.
Yeah.
Most writers are.
Yeah. I usually go through the same process, which when I write it, I think it's great. Then I think it's horrible.
Yeah.
Then I think it's okay. And eventually I'll come back and I'll read it and I'll be like, there's a couple typos.
Well, Dave Rattigan, thank you for joining me on What Do You Want to Do and talking about both of your passions, both of your career choices. And I know you have to get going, so I'm going to end it here. And thank you for joining me. And
thank you. Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
It was. And we'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, I can talk about my other 7 careers.
I didn't know there were more. So for all of you out there, thank you for joining me here on What Do You Want to Do? Join me again next time for another guest. And until then, what do you want to do?